Hope brings a certain calming influence to our lives as we confidently look forward to future events. A healing, an ability that's come, a good thing that's going to happen. Sometimes we just need to give our kids hope that it isn't always going to be this way.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this episode of the Not By Chance podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about teen resistance, something every single parent of a teen has seen and probably misinterpreted. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I hope by the end you can gain some strategies, different ways of seeing resistance, and ultimately finding out what's actually below it so that you can help your teen move forward in the right way. So I've got my wife and partner here, Roxanne. I'm grateful for her and her insights. So Roxanne, I wanted to start out the podcast today with a story that I shared with you this morning, and I think that will kind of set the stage. So a few years ago, I was asked to be a scoutmaster in our area, and that's where you're working with young men, and in this case, I was working mostly with 12, 13-year-olds, and we had a new boy enter the scout troop, and the first thing we did is we had a camp out scheduled. This was going to be in Goblin Valley, Utah, with those very cool formations and rocks and cliffs and things like that. Kind of unique. I like to say Utah has some of the most amazing geography out there. So Goblin Valley is one of those places. And, he's new to the troop. He didn't know the boys all that well. He knew some of them. So the next morning after camping out that night, I started to see some resistance happen. At first, he was just not really moving forward, getting his stuff packed up, his gear ready to get going. And he was just taking all kinds of time doing that. So it's kind of this passive resistance that was happening. And then once we finally got to the place we're going to start to hike, I noticed him saying, "Oh, I don't really want to. I don't like climbing and hiking and things like that. It's just not something I like to do." That was also masking what was really going on. Finally, the boys are climbing up on top. This formation is about 15 feet up. This rock they wanted to get on top of to be able to take a picture. And I really wanted all the boys in the picture. I didn't want to leave him out. And I said, "Hey, how about I just help you get up maybe about as high as I am, about 5'10" or something like that, or 6 foot. We'll get you up there a ways so that you can be in this crack and we can get you into the picture." He was really scared. I started to realize the real thing underneath it all was fear. And, I kind of got underneath him. I got him up in this little crack of the rock, and he moved up a ways, and he turned around, and tears were just running down his face. He was making no sounds. It was just the water was just coming out of his eyes. And at that point, I realized just how scared he was. It was intense fear of heights. And so I got underneath him, and I grabbed his foot and kind of held his foot in a crack that he had found and helped him feel more secure. We took our picture, and that was great. He got down. But then over the course of the day, I noticed that he was willing to go up steeper inclines. He was willing to go up on top of different rocks and things like that. But the way it worked for him was he stopped looking down, and he started to kind of follow the kid in front of him. And the method we had is I followed him. So I was just there, and I think he had this sense of security. It's like, if I fall, he's going to help me. My leader's going to be right there. He's going to help me. So many times throughout the day, I would kind of give him I'd hold his foot, help him move up farther. And he went everywhere the rest of the young men did that day. And so his resistance was gone. Now, a year later, this is what was interesting to me. I thought, in my mind, I'm thinking, he's overcome fear. There's no fear now. And the next year at another camp, and this time the real adventure was going to be a zip lining course that was, and some climbing. what do they call those? High ropes kinds of things that he had to do.
Course.
Yeah, ropes course. And so we get up on the platform, and I'm thinking he has overcome his fear of heights, because I didn't see any tears. I didn't see, anything other than I was kind of still close to him and by him. But he gets all harnessed up, and he launches himself off the platform, and he's ziplining down, and then I noticed that his whole body goes limp. And we actually had a video of this because, we were taking a video of the kids jumping off that, and he had completely fainted. He had, been so afraid that he fainted as he jumped and went all the way down, and they caught him on the other end. What was so interesting about that to me is that he had never actually overcome his fear, but there was no resistance this time. Now, that when I try to compare that to parents dealing with resistant teenager, I have to admit, it's very different being a coach or a leader or a scoutmaster in this case, because I had no historical baggage with this young man. There was no negative that we had to overcome, because there certainly is resistance in our teens based on the relationship that we have with them over time, being the one that has to correct them, being the one to set expectations, ask them to do chores when they don't want to do it, require things of them that they begin to resist. So I know a lot of parents who have said, my child was like perfect, never resisted me, wasn't rebellious, and was willing to do whatever chores I asked them to do. And then almost like one day they changed. And all of a sudden now it's almost impossible to get them to do it without them complaining or getting angry or just saying no in some cases. So I don't know if...
I remember one of our sons on his 13th birthday, it's like this monster was released. Do you remember that? It was the week of his 13th birthday, and it was a different child where he had been agreeable and helpful, cooperative, delightful. All of a sudden he became resistant, angry, ugly. And I remember we were having a big party, and we banished him to the basement like a monster because he was so bad. We said, you can't be with people right now. This is just not good. And so some kids snuck down to visit him in the basement. I mean, it sounds horrific, but it was a true difference. And we have to remember that a lot of this is hormonal. It's they don't even know what's coming out in them, and it's scary for them as well. They don't know why their world feels weird. And I just have to say, parents, remember when you've had hormonal shifts, how it's been so confusing for you. I remember when we were first married and taking hormones, and all of a sudden I was so angry all the time, and I didn't understand why. Well, because I was changing my whole cycle, my whole hormones. And so I think that if you just think back on some of those experiences you've had, you can understand that frustration that they even have in themselves, that they don't know why they feel such rage or such resistance or whatever, but their bodies and brains are changing tremendously.
Yeah, they're going through a radical rewiring of the brain.
True.
Actually is happening right there. And their identity is starting to try to form itself in terms of self-definition, and self-determination is something built into us humans that in time we want to kind of direct our own life. And aren't we glad, honestly, as parents, that that's part of what's going on? That's a big part of what's actually going on, that someday they're going to be able to take care of themselves. They're going to be able to, make hopefully good decisions in their life. This is the beginning of them really kind of taking over. And so instead of seeing it as rebellion, we need to see it as information and communication. It's communicating to us this change that's starting to happen. It also might be communicating, in concert with the change the individual's going through, biologically and developmentally, which is absolutely normal. We start to play a role in the resistance as well if we're not really aware of what's going on. I remember way back when I started my master's program at BYU and was learning about systems theory And one of our professors, Wendy Watson, I found her to be so helpful to me to start to see the world differently, to see patterns and interactions differently. And she said something about how are these people, we'd be watching a colleague doing therapy or something, and she'd ask a question of the rest of us behind the one-way mirror. She'd say, how is Joe unwittingly a part of this cycle that you see, this pattern going on between him and his wife? And that's a really neat word. Think about that. How are we unwittingly a part of the resistance?
And unwittingly removes so much of the guilt and shame and blame. It's not conscious.
Right. So it takes away the blame that we might put on ourselves or other people might, but we're just kind of part of it and we don't realize it. So what we need to do actually is become knowing about the patterns, understanding our contribution to why our teen might be resistant. I'm sure you can think right now, if you got a teenager, you can think right now of occasions when you've seen resistance, and you can look back and remember the feelings and emotions and the judgments probably going on in your own mind at that moment. And so we're unwittingly part of the resistance that we're seeing from our teenager. So step one, I think, as parents is we become very aware of the thoughts and beliefs we have going on. Believe me, they can read us.
In our book, Not by Chance, one of the stories that we tell was of going on a marathon. I was doing these speed walking marathons, and one of the girls that was in the group with us, she was super funny, and we loved having her along because she just made light of everything. But she said, as she started to get blisters, she would say, "Hello, pain, I've been expecting you." And she would say it kind of like Newman. Yeah. Well, Newman would say that. And no. Was it Kramer that would say that? Okay. He'd say, "Hello, Newman, I've been expecting you." And I don't remember if that was...
It was Jerry. It was Jerry, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Sorry, folks. Go back and watch all of your Seinfeld episodes and see what it was and let us know. But basically, it was like, oh, yes, we've been told this was coming. Resistance was coming. Even if they've been an angel child their whole lives, you've heard about the resistance that can come from the self-determination or hormone changes or whatever it is, or fears, or there's been some kind of mental health challenge that has changed them. Be expecting it so that you're not destroyed by it. I think that's a really great point, is going from unwitting and having this happen to you to being the adult in the room and being ready for it, being expecting it. And now you get to apply new tools, which we're going to talk about some of those now.
Yeah, when we think about applying new tools, one of the things we can do is look at the exceptions in their life. The teen is not resistant to everybody out there, and they're not resistant to us in every situation that happens. So we can look at what are the exceptions that are happening. And it might be that, hey, when I was thoughtful about the timing of the request, or instead of making it this is what you have to do to making a request, that feels differently to a teenager. But identifying really specifically, when is the resistance not there? Thinking about that story about the scouting. A parent could look at that, and they probably, the parents in this case, probably tried to get him to do things he was afraid of before, and maybe not with a lot of success. And what could have they learned if they were sort of fly on the wall watching us that day that they could take in? Now, again, I had some advantages, no baggage. I didn't have to correct him on a lot of things. But what they saw was non-judgmentalness, patience, encouragement, like you can do this. Even if you get like 3 feet off the ground, that's okay. Well, that's a great place to begin. Physical support of the, foot. So I'm just saying that we can take away a lot of tips and ideas by looking for these exceptions in our teen's life.
I think that'd be good right now, parents, as you're listening, to think about someone in your life who has said, your daughter's delightful, right when you are in the throes of it with her. And think about why they said that. What did they see? And yeah, they might be her employer or a neighbor or a team member's mom. And you're thinking, I never get to see that. That's not fair. Why does their mom get to see that and I don't? But take note of it and realize that that is as true an experience with her as your hard experiences are with her. That there are two sides, that there are things that are buried, and kids honestly flop for their parents. I mean, when you come home and the kids have been with a babysitter, they see you, they're playing, and then they see you and they fall apart. It's like it's a natural phenomenon. And the babysitters are going, they haven't cried 1 second since you were gone. Why are they doing it now? But somehow they do that. And our kids flop with us. Why? Because they feel safe too.
If you're tired of having power struggles with your teen over freedoms and privileges, put the ball in their court and have them create a plan for how they're going to earn back that freedom. We've got a tool for you. It's free. You can find it at trustandfreedom.trusty.com. You can find that in the description below. Yeah, and if you could really uncover the real emotions going on, that might be helpful. I think one of the patterns that we have a lot and have had is that when we see resistance, we out of frustration, probably we start to instruct more instead of ask questions. And we could ask the question of, there's probably some other emotion underneath this, which, you seem to not be happy with this chore or this thing going on. What are you thinking, feeling right now? I had an experience with one of our adult kids recently where we sat down to have a talk about something I think pretty important. And I think he was expecting me to teach him, to, give him wisdom and or to kind of try to guide him and tell him what to do at some level. But I think I did this really well. I started out with questions. And I just remember he just kind of like stopped and it's like, now I'm going to think about this. Think about what I think, what I feel. Remember, they're trying to have autonomy. So when you're interested in what's going on with them and what's going on inside them, you're allowing them to learn about themselves, to validate that they matter, their feelings matter. All those things will enable them to process and not just resist.
I actually had an experience like that. I can tell it in 30 seconds, but it was a couple of years ago, and we were going to a family reunion, your family reunion, but you were in bed with neck issues or something. And I told one of our teens, you need to go with me to this family reunion. And he was not happy. How far away is it? 2.5 hours. That's going to take my whole Saturday. I don't want to do this. And I had been doing some reading that day thinking, this is what this kid needs to hear. I cannot wait to have these 2.5 hours to instruct or to tell him what he needs to do to correct things in his life. Yeah, he was totally captive. And as we got in the car and started on this trip, I went to say something and my intuition said, ask him what he's been learning. I was like, wait, no, I have my whole lecture ready. I'm ready to go. And instead I said, hey, just tell me something you've been reading or learning this week. And it opened up this dialogue where he shared with me some amazing insights, which calmed my fears that this kid's not learning anything. And it showed me he is. I just don't get to watch over his shoulder like I want to. And we had the most delightful time. He relaxed. We had a great time there. On the way there, great time with all of these people he didn't know, playing silly games, doing whatever. It was a beautiful day, and I could have ruined it with my lecture at the very beginning.
Oh, that's a great example. We all see ourselves in that story for sure. I want to share another new insight that's happening for us right now. So I've talked before in this podcast about the Trust and Freedom recovery tool that we're building that is AI powered in the sense it's got an AI coach in the middle of it. And, this started way back when I started to think about how do we help teens not resist the Trusty app? not resist the process of building trust with their parents. Because to them, what that means is loss of autonomy, probably. If I'm going to build trust with my parent, that means they get their way. Or, I'm not first anymore. Or it's some resistance that goes on with the idea that my parents directing me to use this thing. Well, what flipped for me is I started to see that we needed to both incentivize it, create some motivation behind it so there's a reason to do it, but also kind of put it in their hands so that they can dictate a little bit of how, what's this plan look like for me to build trust and receive a freedom that I really want. And me build the plan in my terms the way I want to do it versus my parent telling me exactly what needs to be done. So that's the philosophy underneath the Trust and Freedom recovery tool. Well, we're receiving some early feedback on how that's working in the real world. We're definitely seeing that it's maybe hard in some ways for parents to get them to engage with the AI at first. I think we're getting better at that, but we're starting to get the first few experiences where teens are engaging with the AI. And one thing I'm noticing in the feedback is that in the initial part of the conversation, the teen is having with the AI, they're resistant. And, they're saying, I hate this, or I don't want to do this, or because remember, their parent asked them to do this. And so I think some of their initial resistance is not actually with the AI coach, it's with their parent. But guess what happens? The AI coach handles it perfectly. The AI coach validates their emotions, their resistance, and why they might be feeling that way. The AI coach then just very gently invites them and lets them know, hey, you can build this plan on your own and this freedom that you want. With that more maturity, you can have that. I'm here to help you do that. Would you like to? And if there's more resistance, they try another way and doesn't give up right away. Well,
it's just been so fun to listen to that thinking, oh, wow, that is not what I would have done. The natural mom in me would want it to be this way, but it just doesn't take offense, doesn't get impatient, just tries a different way. And if they resist that, they say, okay, no problem. What would you like to do? Do you, have a suggestion for how this could go? At first, the kids are one-word answers and snarky, and this is BS, and I shouldn't have to do this. But then they get a little curious because this one doesn't say, well, that's it. Give me your phone. It's gone for a week. The AI coach is all about nurturing and helping and trying new tactics.
Yeah, one example that we heard of was that the teen got, very resistant all the way through till finally the AI says, okay, it sounds like now's not a good time, and
let me know if you
I'm
need
always
help.
here if
Yeah.
you need help,
Yeah.
and all of that, let me know. And I guess she turned right around and said, can we restart? And of course, the AI is not emotional. It's not going to, hold it against her that she was snarky for the first part of the conversation. It just flipped around and said, sure. And, if a teen wants to restart, and they can only come to that if they feel safe, if they can really kind of now look at themselves instead of look at the other person being the one they're resisting to. Now it's just me here. There's nothing to do but look in the mirror. And she was ready at that point to restart. And so then a good conversation ensued, positive outcome took place. And I just thought that was very instructive for all of us as parents of what we could do to overcome the resistance.
Well, it's so helpful to have a mediator. You get into this bad cop role so easily as a parent, but when you have a mediator who can show patience and they can come in fresh and rested and, like Tim has said, no baggage, no history, and they can just be kind and curious and helpful and have no timeline, that is a great start. So this isn't going to take over your role as a parent. There's no way it could. but it is a start to something small. So we talk about micro wins. This can produce a micro win. I think we had one kid who agreed to bring his dishes out of his bedroom to the kitchen. That seems so small because, the mom has a huge list of other things that she wanted, but you have to look at what has started. And this is the first step on a road to getting more maturity and more of what you want and thus what they want.
Yeah, so all we need to do is turn off our emotions.
Yeah, that's it.
And the AI coach, they have the advantage again here that they don't have emotions. They can be very compassionate and kind and non-judgmental and all those things. But guess what? It works. Mm-hmm. So that basically means now now that you've listened to this podcast, you'll see yourself the next time these emotions take over and you become part of unwittingly now wittingly, you're seeing it. And now I'm part of this cycle of resistance that's happening. And the fastest way to change that is to change you. Some of the takeaways I hope you've gotten from today's podcast is that the number one variable in the teen's resistance might be your contribution to it, so you can make a change on that. Another one is that compassionate listening. And I would say instead of trying to get your teen to do the chore in 100 different ways and failing, always go back to the idea of connection. That if that connection is being strengthened, that is going to lower the resistance on virtually everything, because that changes the whole recipe of what's happening between you and your teen. So when in doubt, focus on that relationship, that connection.
One story I wanted to share was just an experience a couple of weeks ago going to lunch with a friend who was sharing with me some real struggles with depression. And my first response was, well, have you seen this doctor? And have you tried these supplements? And what does your family think? And then I finally said, you're totally going to get through this. You've done it before. And she leaned forward and said, do you really think so? I said, absolutely. And as the meal went on, when we finished, she's like, thank you for telling me you believed in me. And I'm like, oh, what about all the other brilliant ideas I had? That wasn't what she needed. She did not need relief. She did not need more ideas, which is what we as parents dish up first, often for our children. She needed my belief in her ability to come through that. And this is hinged on hope. And I just want to read a great quote from Stephen Snow, who said, hope is an emotion which brings richness to our everyday lives. It's defined as the feeling that events will turn out for the best. When we exercise hope, we look forward with desire and reasonable confidence. As such, hope brings a certain calming influence to our lives as we confidently look forward to future events. A healing, an ability that's come, a good thing that's going to happen. Sometimes we just need to give our kids hope that it isn't always going to be this way.
Love that. That ingredient is magical, hope. And actually, we can do some things that would inspire hope, not just in our team, but actually in ourselves, by simply, looking for the exceptions, focusing on that, noticing any kind of degree of less resistance, and realizing it's not fixed, it can be changed. And just that realization and doing a few things on our side of that interaction, all of that's within our power. We're not just hopelessly sitting on the sidelines. As parents, it's easy to lose hope. I was talking to a guy yesterday that I shared an example of kind of a breakthrough with the Trust and Freedom Recovery tool between a parent and a teenager. And he was asking whether the tool is efficacious. Did it have efficacy? And that basically means, does it have the ability to actually produce change? Does it work? And I shared an example of that beginning of hope because of the outcome of this interaction between the AI coach and the child, and then what the parent received, the letter they received from the child. And I said, the first step in this long-term change that that you want in the child's mental health or their self-esteem or your relationship with them it's ignited by a feeling of hope because it replaces hopelessness. And all kinds of actions can come out of that. So wherever you're at, any kind of step you can make, any change you can recognize that's happened already is the beginning point. So we invite you to take that and notice in the actions that you take afterwards, notice the both increase in hope, but also the change that you'll see in the other person. We're inviting change as we do that. Thank you for listening to the podcast today, and we hope the very best for you and your teen and your relationship going forward.